My name is Dave Zapponi. I'm the CEO of ECHO, otherwise known as the Educational Council of Homeowners. I want to thank you for participating in today's community conversation. Is your HOA ready for EV charging? ECHO is a statewide nonprofit association established to support HOA board members and engaged homeowners. Our mission is to foster a better quality of life in community associations through education, advocacy, and connections. For today's event, we have a few housekeeping items. These are now presented on your screen. Take a moment to review them if you would. This slide deck was sent to all registered attendees prior to today's event. And please take a moment to review those housekeeping items. Today, we have a large audience of HOA members. We will do our best to answer your questions, but we may run out of time, likely will run out of time. So we're going to use a special feature. Please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. The questions from the Q&A feature will then be answered some of them will be answered during the presentation. That'll be live. And after the initial presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. Some questions may be answered by others in the Q&A or in the program. And so we encourage you to do that, those of you professionals in the industry. To prioritize your questions, please use the upvote button. It's the thumbs up in the Q&A feature. Those questions with the most upvotes will be answered first. Simply use the thumbs up for your favorite questions, and you'll see the little feature in the bottom, I think, left corner of your screen, and vote for your favorites. Those questions with the most upvotes will likely be chosen first. Also, please keep your questions short and general in nature. We may skip some questions that are too long or too complex. Specific questions about your community are best asked of your attorney or another appropriate expert familiar with your situation. Please use the chat feature to report technical issues and to communicate directly with other participants in the webinar. We do not monitor the chat conversations for questions. For today's presentation, we are also doing something a little special. After the general session, the Q&A, we have a special treat for you. Several regional EV programs are hosting breakout rooms where you can learn more about how to minimize your costs for installations. They are going to be talking about their programs, so good to talk to them. We encourage you to take advantage of this unique opportunity to learn about programs, especially if you have plans to add EV or other electronic programs in your community. Mike, our presenter, will speak a bit more about who we have here today during his program. Now, let me direct your attention to your monitor where you will find our disclaimer. None of what is said during this seminar shall be construed as specific legal or expert advice from the speaker sponsors or ECHO. If you wish specific advice, we encourage you to contact your attorney or another suitable expert. The information we provide during this webinar is educational in nature and should not be relied upon for specific decision-making purposes. Thank you for that. And join me in thanking today's sponsor, CID Consortium, LLC, an excellent program sponsor, and actually he's the president. Adam Haney is the president of ECHO, so we appreciate their continued support. Introduction of our presenter today. Mike Winslow believes cost-effective charging for electric vehicles should be ubiquitous and equitably available to everyone. 80 to 90% of charging happens at home, and about 40% of Americans' homes are in multi-purpose properties. To enable those 40% of us who live in these multifamily properties, he joined Go Power EV. Mike is currently building a partner ecosystem for Go Power EV with electrical contractors, utilities, and municipalities. Mike has presented for RE+, PG&E, He's been on multiple panels and talks frequently about EV charging stations. So we are very happy to have Mike here today. And Mike, I'm going to pass it over to you, and thank you everyone for coming today.
Something just happened to my voice.
David, thank you very, very much. That was a beautiful introduction, and thank you to you and the organization and Connor for all the work you've done. It's let's have a good 60, 70 minutes here of conversation, and then you'll follow up with 30 minutes in the breakout rooms. So let's just dive in. Yep. Is your HOA ready for EV charging? So next slide. I first want to start off with a big thank you. There are over a dozen organizations that are putting their time into today's event. These are the organizations that are participating. So thank you very much to everyone who's taking their time to be here today. Everyone you see on this screen are the people that you'll meet in these breakout rooms. They have years and years and years of experience bringing EV charging to properties. They're resources for you. And today's conversation is really all about providing some information, putting into your minds some things that you need to be thinking about and start investigating, and then some resources that can then help you further. My contact information is in the presentation. Everybody, by virtue of being here today or signing up for this or watching this video, is welcome to reach out to me, and we'll go from there. All right, onward. So resources and information. The high-level summary of today, we're going to talk about some types of EV charging because we're going to do a little level set. I'm not going to assume anybody here knows anything about charging an EV. Then we're going to go into a little bit about what you should be thinking on your electrical system for your building. I saw one of the very first Q&A questions was directly to that point, so we'll talk about that some. What you need to evaluate in your property's infrastructure. So what are you looking at in your property? What do you need to be looking for? And then, the big question, we've got all these people that my complex that want to charge their EVs, who's paying for their electricity, right? I mean, I know that comes up. So we'll talk a little bit about how that can work. And then we'll also get into the breakout rooms is where the subsidies and financial incentives. And by the way, there's technical resources in there too. So all kinds of great information. Connor, next slide. So why are we talking about EV charging? Why are your properties bringing this up, right? Well, reality, 40% of us live in multifamily. 50% of the cars are going to be EVs by 2035 in new sales. And 80 to 90% of EV charging takes place at home. So the reason that if you're sitting on a board and you've got members coming to you and they're complaining they want to charge their car at home, that's because 80 to 90% of that statistically takes place there. So people really want this. It's highly convenient, and we'll show a slide in a minute about that. Yep, perfect. By the way, I also assume by the fact that you're actually here today, you have residents that are asking about this and wanting to charge at home, if it's not you yourself. All right, next slide. Okay, this is a little resource. So this will be in your handouts. You've already gotten the slides, but you can go to this page. What I'm highlighting here is, providing property owners with a unique way to help and attract and retain residents. What is EV charging doing at your multi-family property? It attracts people. So your owners in a complex, right? You want that complex to be as nice as possible because one day you may decide to sell your unit. And to be honest, EV charging at a property actually increases your resale value. So those younger folks or whoever's coming in and buying, they do look for these things. Then there's the reality that living in multifamily and trying to do EV charging, you face unique considerations when installing charging stations. You're not a single family residential. If people on this call are living in townhouse style where the garage is part of your unit and the power in the garage where you're going to park that EV is already tied to your unit, honestly, you can take the rest of the day off because you're just like a single family residential home then. For the rest of us that have, common garages, so forth and so on, this is important content. All right, next slide. Okay, so this guy is talking about 20 to 25% of new car sale today are EVs, period, end of story. There's a few of us that are registered in here that are not from California, but most of the people on the call today are from California. These are California stats. New car sales, 20 to 25%, 1 in 4, and that goes higher in some areas. County of San Mateo is much higher, some other stuff. Then on top of that, 1 in 14 of all California cars are already EVs. That's 8%. So if you live in a 100-unit complex, you have somewhere between 8 to 25 EVs on site today. So, this is not a problem that's going to go away. It's not a fad. It's not any of those things. It is something we absolutely have to address and we have to get an answer for, so forth and so on. Okay, next slide. And by the way, I'm going to remind, I see a lot of stuff popping up in the chat. If you have questions, those go into the Q&A. So find that button on your screen and put your questions in there so they can get upvoted. Okay, HOA condominium EV charging. So a little bit about this. This is a little busy slide. EV adoption continues to increase. Why is it doing that? Because there's a lot of options, right? There's a whole bunch of different vehicles people can get. When EVs started, it was kind of a cool, hip thing. It might have been because you're saving the planet. There's a lot of reasons people bought in. But today, EVs are just another car. It's nothing special. It just happens to run on electricity. And when you go out there and you're shopping, you look at these things, you kind of like, hey, that's actually a pretty good deal. So when you look at an EV, people are buying them now because they're affordable, they're quiet, you never have to go to a gas station again, oil changes are gone. There's all kinds of reasons people look at this and they're like, hey, this is a good deal. If anybody in here is in some kind of economically supported community, there are amazing rebates in California for buying used EVs if you're income qualified. So even if you're just income qualified, you don't have to be in a special place. People are walking away, rare cases, this is not normal, but people are walking in using some of these rebates. They're walking out with a car and cash in their pocket when they traded in their old car. So that's rare, but it happens occasionally. But you are talking about $10,000, $15,000, and $20,000 to actually go buy one of these things. And that's, again, we're not talking about some esoteric technology anymore. We're talking about an everyday product people use. So again, 40% of us, let's see, what else do we have on here? Personal charging. This is kind of talking a little about, but what we look for when we're trying to do EV charging installations is what makes an EV charging installation at a multifamily property resonate like it's a single family residential experience. That's something we try, and we'll get into the conversation about, are we doing charging in the shared spots or in the assigned spots? Okay, e-mobility. The reason there's a picture of all the scooters and stuff down there is there's also a lot of push towards getting people into bicycles or scooters or whatever that are also electrically powered. So when you're putting in a charging system, you might want to consider it's not just four-wheeled vehicles people will want to charge. It's also two-wheeled. And how are you going to support those? And do you want those things charging up in the residential unit if you don't provide something down in the garage area? All right, so if you're doing new construction, there's all kinds of codes for this stuff. You have to do stuff. I'm going to assume that the bulk of this conversation is about existing buildings and how to get EV charging there. Okay, next slide. All right, this is just a reality. The whole point of this slide is gas stations and having to go somewhere to fuel your ride was the abnormal event. The normal event for, 5,500, 6,500 years was you rode home on your horse, put it in your pasture next to your house. When you wanted to go somewhere, you hopped back on and took off. In 1905, the first gas station was installed, and now we had to leave home, find a gas station, wait for your turn, fuel up, drive back home or wherever you're going for that day. And now when 2010 came around, we actually had cars that we didn't have to take anywhere to fuel them. It's a huge boon and convenience. And if you don't have one yet, talk to anyone else who has EVs that can actually charge where they live, and they'll tell you how much it's like. It's just great. I never think about it. I park, I plug in, I go to bed, don't worry about it. Next morning, I go wherever I want. So that's what, if you don't have an EV, that's why people like them so much. It's because it's convenient. All right, next slide. Okay, a brief overview. We're going to go through about 4 slides of what are the types of EV charging. And it's bucketed into 3 buckets. There's L1, L2, L3 DC fast charging. What are those? L1 stands for level 1. So that's the, I don't have my pointer. That's the guy on the left-hand side there where it says level 1. What does level 1 mean? Level 1 charging means you're charging that EV at 120 volts, which is a regular wall plug. So all around your condo there where you've got wall plugs, those are level 1 charging ports for EVs if you happen to have one in your living room. Point is, that's all that is. When you look at technology and deploying it in your garages, you do have the option. You could just say, hey, we're going to give electricity away at level 1 plugs, and it's a flat fee. Life goes on. That's about the lowest cost EV installation you can do in your property. I'll give you a hint. UC Irvine did that in one of their parking garages, and they upped the parking fees for that garage, like, I don't know, 20, 30 bucks a month, and everybody's pretty happy. The next thing is level 2. This is what you hear about all the time. Level 2 charging, level 2 charging. What does that mean? So level 2 charging is the voltage level goes up to 240 volts or 208 volts, depending on the building you're in. And it provides electrons a little faster. So, by the way, hit the display, do the next build animation. So typically level 1, you think about it, you're not going to go with your car down at 20%, plug into level 1 and get a lot of distance in an hour, right? So it's overnight charging. You park your car in your assigned spot, you plug it in, you go to bed, you wake up in the morning, you recovered the miles you drove that day and then some. And level 2, I call that the quick top off. So level 2 charging has a span. We'll get into the details, but now you're at 240 volts. So it's like your dryer circuit or other things that are running at that higher voltage. And then your last thing is level 3 charging. And you see that in your mini malls, your 7-Elevens, all that kind of stuff, where you pull in and you can get a lot of mileage recovery in a pretty short amount of time. So I call that the quick fill up. All right, next slide. Let's break down level 1 just a little bit. First of all, where do you see it? Where is it used? It's used at home. It's used at places where people work, and it's used where you park all day long. Why? Because it takes a while for those electrons to get into that car. So that's the places it's used. It's available at any 15 or 20 amp, 120 volt outlet. There's a little thing here about 94% of everyday charging needs, and the details are at the bottom. You guys have the decks. You can go to that website and look it up. But there was a study done in the county of San Mateo by the CCA there, PCE. So thanks, PCE folks that are on the call. And out of that study, they surveyed and said, hey, if somebody only plugged into that outlet in their garage, does that do it for them? Does it give them all the charging they need? And they said, well, turns out it covered 94% of your everyday driving needs, which is huge. And it's important that this group understands that, because you're trying to figure out how do we economically enable EV charging for lots of people. So that's something that you really should think about. It also happens to be the lowest, quote, strain on your building's electrical system. So, it pulls the least amount of power per car. It's commonly used in living. You can get about 50 to 60 miles overnight being 12 to 14 hours. By the way, in the United States, the average miles driven on a daily basis is 38. So if you can get back 50 to 60 miles every night, the average person is getting back more miles than they drive on a daily basis. And then it's also that, you've heard me say it, but park, plug in, go home. You'll hear me say that over and over again, because that's the mentality is you don't use an electric vehicle like you do a gas vehicle. Most people in their gas vehicle, they wait until it's almost empty, then they go fill it up, and then they go again for however long that lasts them. In an electric car where you can charge where you park it all the time, it's the inverse. It's basically full all the time unless you just did a really long drive. Okay, next slide. All right, a little bit about level 2 charging. Where is it used? Home, workplace, all day parking. Oh, and by the way, also at malls, restaurants, 7-Elevens, hotels. And what does it give you? So a level 2 charger overnight can add to a car between 120 and 420 miles of range extension. Why is that so wide? Because it depends how much power is flowing through that circuit to the car. It starts at a 20 amp breaker. And by the way, I'm going to try to educate you guys on some buzzwords as we go. So if you hear somebody say low power level 2, what that means is level 2 charging with a 20 amp circuit feeding that charger. That's low power level 2. Everything else above that is just called plain old level 2. And you can have a 30 amp circuit, which is common for your dryer or your stovetop, and then 40, 50 is also some of those, and then 60 and 80s are other large one. So that's level 2. That's what it gives you. That's kind of where you see it used. Next. All right, now we're on to level 3, or DC fast charging. Okay, This is, oh, by the way, cost of implementation goes up almost an order of magnitude every time you go up a bracket of charging. Yeah, it's more or less correct. Maybe not an order of magnitude between level 1 and level 2. Maybe it's a 4 to 5x multiplier. All right, level 3, probably goes up 2 orders of magnitude. So this is where you bring in very seriously large power. I would be shocked if anybody on this call thought about putting a level 3 charger in their property. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I've had people ask, I've had people investigate it. It's an expensive proposition. Usually where your properties are located, unless you're in an industrial area or you have high-powered transmission lines nearby, the utility may have a little bit of a challenge bringing enough power for your DC fast charger to your property, but on top of what you already are using. So, but this is what's called your corridor charging, your quick fill up. When you're driving between, I always use the example of the Bay Area and Southern California, and you stop at the In-N-Out in Kettleman City, you plug into one of these. You plug in, you go get a burger, you come out, your car's are, topped off to a point, and you take the rest of the drive. Next slide. Awesome. Okay. So that was the styles of, or the kind of buckets of EV charging. And now we are let's dig in a little bit and talk about your building's electrical system. Before I started talking, I did see one of the questions was, my building was built in 1965, I think was the question. Do we have to bring new power to it? Can we, those kinds of things. Yeah, those are the questions you need to kind of start asking. And I can tell you from experience, I am happily shocked how many buildings that, were built some period ago, 65 maybe on the edge of a little too old. But if you were built, say, 80s, 90s, maybe 70s, if you think about what we have done with all of our electronics in the last 30, 40, 50 years, when you used to plug in your TV in your living room when the building was built in 1980, not only did the TV entertain you, but it also heated the entire space. And now we take that TV that used to use all that power and we hang it on the wall like it's a poster, and it about uses as much power as a poster. And then you think about the energy efficiency in your appliances, all of the lighting upgrades you've probably all done at your properties to get your utility bill down. And what we happily find is we go into a lot of buildings and we find there's a tremendous amount of what we call available power in your existing infrastructure. Okay. Now we're going to hit the button and talk about how do we tap into that. So where do we pull power from? Do we pull it from a residential meter, a house meter, or a new meter that's just for the EVs? All right, let's jump into residential. So yeah, perfect. Thanks, Connor. So if you're looking at residential, okay, so we want to say, okay, great. In our HOA, we just want people to put in a conduit and run it back to the meter section and pull their power from their meter. You can do that. Okay. There's a lot of caveats to it. There's products out there that help you with this. Okay. When you buy that, you add that technology. That's what the first bullet's saying. There's a technology out there that you bolt in, and you can see the boxes there. I brought in some pictures of this technology being installed. And that box, basically you take the wires that used to go to your unit, you run them into the box, and then you run them out to your unit. And then from that box, you run that to your parking spot. Okay. This will not work for all properties. Let's say you're in a multi-story property and your meters are on the 5th story. It's most likely not going to be cost effective for you to run that power back down to the garage. Ask the electrician, get a quote, but that's my conjecture. If you happen to have all of your meters in your garage, this might work for you. Benefits. You buy it once, you pay for the installation, you're done. That's a nice benefit. Detractors. You got to have the space. I have walked into lots and lots and lots of electric rooms, and most of them I see, they were optimized to fit into the room they were built in, is the nicest way I can put that, and there's no space for anything anymore. So you have to have the space for these devices. The other detractor is you're tied to your residential tariffs. Your tariff is what you're paying for electricity inside of your unit. So if you're using the power from your residential meter, you're at that tariff rate. Some utilities will recognize that you have an EV and they might do something for you. There's some innovation in that space, but most today you're going to pay that tariff. And I can tell you why that's a detractor, not a positive in a minute. The other thing you have to consider is once you do that, you have forever linked those parking spaces to that unit. Now, if you're deeded parking spaces, you don't care. You've already done that. Doesn't matter. You're not going to trade off parking spaces. Not a big deal. I bring that up a lot of times. We talk to places where there's rental units that go through and parking spaces may change. So something to think about. And then the last bit, when you do this, whatever you put at the end of it, you need to have some kind of security for it, unless you totally trust your neighbors, which hopefully you all do because you live in a community. But in a lot of, there's places where maybe your parking is, what do you say? It's tuck under, maybe there's no gates, you know, could someone else just swing in and charge their whatever while you're not paying attention? You have to think of those things. Okay, so that's that piece. I wanted to go back to residential tariffs really fast. So something you should be educated about in your various electric systems in your building, you have your house meter and then you have your residential meters. Those two things are typically on different tariff schedules. Your utility looks at your house meter as a commercial account and puts you on commercial rates. And they look at your meters going to your residential units as residential. So just like single family residential. And when you look at tariff schedules, typically your commercial rates are actually higher than your residential rates. So, and then there's one more set of rates that are coming out. So I'll use PG&E as an example because I'm sitting in PG&E territory. Also Silicon Valley Clean Energy. Thanks for being on the call, guys. And PG&E. Thanks, Sindel, for being on the call. So if you look at there, you now have what's called EV rates. Currently, those EV rates are usually reserved for when everything behind that electric meter is for EV charging. And those EV rates, especially for the off-peak charging times, can be substantially less than residential, which is less than commercial. So things to think about as you're building out a system. Okay, next slide. So the next thing we're going to talk about here is what if I install my EV charging system behind my house meter? You can totally do that, right? There's typically requires, you have to have enough power available behind the house meter. And because you're HOAs, typically you're installing EV charging for everyone at the property. So for a complex full of cars, okay, most house meters in modern buildings are just they're in the residential meter bank and they have like 200 amps. Okay, the older the building, the higher the chance that your house meter has, elevators and other things on it and pool pumps, and it might be at 400, could be 600. So the older, actually, the kind of a little bit better for that, but that's your house meter. Okay, when you install your EV charging behind your house meter, we just had the tariff discussion. You're now using electricity at commercial rates for most places, and that's something to consider. Benefits, if you're doing a smaller installation where there's power available behind that house panel, can be very cost effective, right? You're not adding a new meter section, you're not buying a whole bunch of gear, you're just doing that. You do have to think about how you're going to disperse the cost of the electricity to the people using it. So detractors, a lot of times behind the house meter, there's limited power. A big one I talk about with people just to kind of raise the flag up or put up the big red warning light. If you put your EV charging system on the same panel with your laundry room and your pool pumps and your common area lighting and HVAC, etc., you may find you subject yourself to demand charges, which you've probably never heard of. A demand charge, and they apply to commercial meters, which in this case it would be a commercial meter. So demand charge is when you pull a certain bucket of power in a certain amount of time, the utility looks at that and goes, oh man, you're creating quite a peak of energy usage on my network. You need to pay us for that. And, that's what a demand charge is. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but just be aware of it if you try to combine all these loads, right? Okay. And then the last thought is you still have to figure out some way to divvy up the usage of the power so that the people that are using it are the ones paying for it. Next slide. Okay, so last option here. Is there any more than these three options? I don't think so. The last option here, putting in a new meter that's dedicated to EV charging. So when you do that, what you're typically doing is your benefits there is it's a new meter base. You need a new panel installation. Great. You have to have room in the electric room, just like everything else. It has to go somewhere. Usually that meter needs to be co-located with all the other meters. Most utilities prefer that or sometimes demand it. So at least that piece has to be there. You could move the load center or all the circuit breakers out into the garage area if there's a good place for it, which actually decreases the cost of your installation. So if I don't talk about it later, if we talk about how your property is laid out, you'll think about where the power is coming from and where your parking spaces are, and realize the longer the run from the source of power to the parking spot, you have what's called resistance in your wires, which means you have to go to a larger gauge, which means that costs a little more. So you try to kind of centralize your load center so it kind of goes out in all directions in equal distance. All right, so benefits of this, dedicated EV meter. You can tie in to the main bus bars, and you have access to all the power that's available in that section of gear that's in your property. Now that's a bunch of jargon, and I know it, so let's break it down a little bit. So when power comes to your property, depending on the size of your property, you could be using, power could be coming from a transformer up on a pole, or if your property is a little larger, you might have your own transformer sitting on property that feeds the electrical systems of your building. A reasonable mid-sized building will have maybe one large electric room with all of the meters and everything in it. And you'll see anything from, I'm going to guess in your size property, 600 to 4,000 amps in that section. And when we go in and we tie into the bus bars in that gear, that means your EV charging system could have access to all of that power, which can be very beneficial. Usually you're not going to access all of it. You're going to access a portion of it, but now you're not down behind the house meter. You're kind of ahead of that meter with your own EV meter. Okay, it separates, when you put this EV meter in, you're separating the loads between your house meter, which is your dryers, your pool, stuff, elevators, stuff we talked about, and your EV. Many EV charging systems, they can manage that peak usage to avoid demand charges. So by separating these things, you're not trying to layer them together in one meter. And then, if you look into your provider for your EV charging system, see to make sure if they manage their peak usage and they're not going to, cause these demand charges. And then there are some operators out there. When you look at EV equipment, there's hardware vendors and network operators, and sometimes they're combined into one entity. And there are some network operators out there that will actually just pay that bill directly. If you contract with them to manage that entire service on your property or that amenity, they may just pay the utility bill for you, and you don't even have to think about it as an HOA, which is fantastic. That's also the benefit of separating your loads between your house meter and your EV meter, is that, they're no longer conjoined. You don't have to do some kind of true up, so forth and so on. Detractors are going this route. There can be a time delay. So to be honest, the industry is still recovering from issues we had with supply chain back in COVID. COVID plus big EV boom meant supply chain issues. So there can be, I've seen about 6 months for large gear orders to come in. Not a deal breaker. I mean, you are going to be in these places for years. And typically you can order that gear kind of in process with doing some of your permitting and other stuff. So it doesn't really cost too much of a delay. Your installation could cost a little more because you got this new gear. And then you need some kind of system to divvy up that power, or your system could be flat rate. You just let people pay for a monthly stipend. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, now we talked about where you could get your power from in your electrical room, whether you get it from the residential meter, the house meter, or you go and put an EV dedicated meter in. The next thing to think about is, okay, how do I know where to get the power from? Can my existing electrical gear handle, this new influx of EV charging that we're trying to put on it? So what we do a lot is we do what's called a load study. You'll see that down at the bottom bullet. But things to consider, where is your source of power in comparison to your parking? Think about that. Is there some way to make that more advantageous? If you really want to help your electrician and your designers for your system, find your e-sheets for your complex. What does that mean? When your building was built, there was this huge set of plans. Most of you have digitized them and archived them somewhere. Now you have the A sheets for architectural, you have the M sheets for mechanical, and you have the E sheets for electrical, and the S sheets for your site, so forth and so on. So the E sheets and also some of the architectural are the most helpful thing you can provide to a contractor to say, hey, when our building was built, this was the electrical system. I always ask for those when we interface with a property and we're trying to figure out how to help them add EV charging to their property. Then when you're thinking about it, you might also want to just understand how you're connected to your transformer for your property. It could be on site, it could be on a pole, could be next door. And the reason for that is, like someone had asked that one question I did see, well, what if I need more power brought to my building? Well, it's going to come from some kind of transformer. So knowing where that is useful. We look at, are the lines to your property subterranean? Are they overhead? I can tell you that in this, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area down in Sunnyvale, and I can tell you here, they won't pull overhead lines for more than I think it's 400 amps anymore. So if you wanted to pull in more than that, it's going to go underground. So you're going to be trenching, so forth and so on. So just things you have to know about that. And then your gear's ability, two common ways, there's probably more, but two common ways to figure out if you could put in EV charging with your existing infrastructure. One is to hire an electrician to come in and do a load study. And the reason I say hire an electrician is you don't want anybody opening this gear that's not licensed. So get someone that's licensed and knows what they're doing. There's a lot of power in this stuff. And they're actually reaching in there while it's, they will usually power it down. So plan for a building, power outage for a period of time. But they go in and what they do is they add what's called a CT clamp or a row coil around the bus bars. And that piece of equipment measures the electron flow and it also measures the voltage. And we do that for what's called a 30-day load study. And that's a National Electric Code item. Many authorities having jurisdiction, municipalities and utilities will accept that for design criteria, not all. We've had some instances where you have to do what's called load calculations. And so you just calculate everything attached to your electrical system, and then you see if there's room for EV charging. And then the other way is you can request, and we just did this recently for one property, so you know who you are on this call. Thank you for supplying the data. You can request from your utility 12-month max demand data. I honestly don't know if every utility will supply it, but many do, and it's a good thing to ask for. And what that does is basically they aggregate all the meter data from your property for the last year, and they look for the crossover points for when there was the most energy being used. And so let's say that metering section you see on the right, or that, switchgear section you see on the right is like a 1,000 amp breaker. They would use all that meter data to say, geez, at this property, there was no point in time in the last 12 months where there was more than 400 amps being used at the exact same moment in time. And that would tell us that, geez, so 400 is what's being used, 1,000 is the breaker size. You can only design up to 80% of that, so 800. That would mean we have 400 amps that we could use for EV charging. So something to think about. Next slide. Okay. I know this is a hot button. I will cover this as good as I can in the time allocated. And there's a lot that you can go into with ensuring fair electrical usage and billing for residents, right? So if you decide to go with, charging system behind the residential meters, you're really done. That's an option, right? If you decide to use the house power or an EV meter, how are you going to get those charges paid for? Well, good news for you. There are lots of systems out there that will, create an environment where you have basically create an account, you fund the account, you use that account to start your charging sessions, and then all of those charging sessions are now tied to you, the user, and you pay for those charging sessions through, say, that app or that portal, and then that goes to whoever the provider is, and then they remit to the property if it's on the house meter electrical usage. If it's on an EV dedicated meter and that provider happens to pay the bill, they just collect the money from the residents. Life goes on. be honest, you're gonna that is a service, that's an amenity, that usually doesn't come for free. I don't know anybody giving those services away, but it's just like your pool, it's just like your landscaping. These are all things that you maintain to have a nicer community. This is a new amenity on property. You're basically moving the gas station home, for lack of a better term. It's an amenity. So, I wish it was free, but in reality, this is the way it works. And then that's that outsource piece. So I just kind of talked about that third party that can do that monitoring, have those accounts for you, and you outsource to them. You outsource that service to them. All right, next slide. I got to be honest, I'm waiting for these slide transitions. I'm looking at those 31 questions down there and kind of excited to see which ones get upvoted the most. Okay, let's talk about, do you want to do common charging, or do you want to do assigned charging? And what does that mean? Okay, so this picture you see on the screen right now is what I term the shared model of charging. So this is the kind of only charging that was available for about the first 10 years, right? Most people, especially in multifamily, didn't go install an EV charger in their parking spot. Right, not in mass. One or two people did here and there. Kind of expensive. So in this model, you put some chargers, I call it out in the back 40, so the corner of the parking lot where nobody really wants to park anyway, make those people park way out there. And there's a limited number of chargers, and people park there when they need to charge and they move their car. Okay, let's talk about that experience, right? So limited availability. By the way, this worked great for the last 10 years. And why did it work so great for the last 10 years? Because in your average 100-unit complex for the last 10 years, you had 2, 3, 4, 5 people driving EVs, and they were sharing, say, 2 charging ports. And you know what they did? They had a little text message group, between the 5 of them. They said, hey, I'm done. Whoever wants to use it now, come on over. Frankly, they high-fived each other as they handed off that J plug, which is the end of the cord you plug into the car, because, they all bought EVs. They were doing great things for the planet, and they were happy to see other people driving them, and that resource wasn't overtaxed, right? As we move forward, we already talked about the mass adoption of EVs, the fact that they're just cars now, right? They just happen to run on electricity. So that model will tend to lean towards, instead of range anxiety, now you get charger availability anxiety. You get tension between the residents or the tenants or whatever, because, hey, that's Joe's car. You can look at the machine and tell it's done charging. He hasn't moved it for 6 hours, and I need to charge and I need to go to work. These things come up. And so what do you do to try to encourage people to move? You do things called idle fees. And the idle fee means the charger knows when it's done giving electricity to your car. And instead of charging you the low rate for the electricity, you set the idle fee. And by the way, I've seen lots of places set it for like $5 an hour or more, because it's the stick to get you to move your car. So that's a problem there. Cars have to draw power quickly because you want them to move. So you need to have an infrastructure that can support that high power drain. Typically, you're going to do some, grid upgrades, transformer, so forth and so on, because of that peak power usage. So anytime you pull a lot of electrons quickly, you start to trigger upgrades, right? So that's what's going on there. And then the reality is, because it's a lot of power moving around, usually they're more difficult and expensive to scale up. Next slide. So if we move from the shared charging model and we move to what we call assigned charging or personal charging, next slide, then we get into this space here where we have assigned and dedicated parking. We enable more spots, totally get rid of that availability anxiety. You can cover one spot for every resident in the complex. You can cover all the spots in the complex. You can cover a percentage of the spots and reassign parking if they're not deeded, or if you're willing to do that, if everybody in the community is willing. So you have options here. But the idea is, every time you come home, you park in the spot that you're now assigned to, and you just park, plug in, and go home. I told you you're going to hear that from me over and over again. Park, plug in, go home. So that's the 2 models of charging: shared versus personal or assigned. All right, next slide. All right. Little touch again on e-mobility. So once again, when you're looking at doing this kind of stuff, micromobility is coming up. There's a lot of push to get people onto electric bikes and that kind of stuff and things and scooters. What I call my PSA, my public service announcement is if you're going to have e-mobility charging, I really recommend you do it down in the garage. Do it in that nice all concrete area if that's what your garage is like. Encourage people to keep their bikes in the bike locker. If you have a bike locker area, add some charging ports in there. You really don't, want these devices. When I was up in Seattle a few years ago and I was looking at these efficiency apartments, they had a lot of bikes. And I looked at the owner and I said, hey, this apartment complex here, I see you got all these bikes, and I know in Seattle we got a lot of e-bikes. Where do you think your residents are charging those things? And he kind of looks at me and goes, I don't know. And I said, well, rains here a lot, doesn't it? And they come in with a wet bike. He's like, yeah. I said, well, if they're not charging it in the bike locker, I'm pretty sure they're taking that wet bike right down your carpeted hallway, into your carpeted elevator, down your next carpeted hallway, and into their apartment to plug it in and let it charge. I mean, is that still what you want to have happen, or would you rather have them leave it in the garage and just charge it there? So as you're considering EV charging, considering e-mobility as well, that's the message from this slide. Next slide. Okay, so when you're installing EV charging, things to consider. Do you want residents to charge in their own space, or do you want the shared, right? We just talked about that. When you're looking at this, are you going to try to piece something together? AKA, you're going to buy hardware from over there. You're going to find an electrician over here, an architect over there, or are you going to look for somebody that does what I call the concierge approach and they do it all for you? That's that complete install side. And then on the ongoing management side, earlier David mentioned I'd been on a few panels. A few years ago, I was on a panel down in Las Vegas, and one of the panel members, managed buildings. So for those of you that manage on here, and after the panel, when I talked a little bit about what my company does, the company I'm at does, and how we work, and the fact that we actually manage the entire system, and we look at it as kind of like charging as a service, AKA, we partner with the property. Anyway, point being, look for ongoing management, because if you don't have that, who's going to fix it, right? Something breaks, who fixes it? Who's going to manage the uptime? Who's going to make sure it's still working? So I encourage, look for the ongoing management. It's just like your property manager. It's just like your laundry room. It's just like your pool. This is one of those amenities. I know I'm repeating myself, but it's a message that has to get heard. It's an amenity that does need to be maintained. Hopefully the maintenance is very little and very low and very few, but by putting it on someone else, they're actually incentivized then to make sure you have an equipment and a system that doesn't need a lot of touches. Okay. When you're looking at EV charging, are you looking for something to do out a whole garage or do a few spaces? I can tell you as a vendor, I really appreciate it when someone already knows what they want and they say, we've already talked about it. We know what we want. We want you to bid doing these 150 spots over here. Don't worry about the visitor or guest. Or we want you to do the 150 spots. And oh, by the way, we would like something in the visitor or guest, because, when my son or grandson or daughter or something drives in from wherever, we'd like them to be able to recover a bunch of electrons quickly while they're visiting, right? So all of those things are possible. Just think through your property, your scenario, how it's used. What does your community need? You're all different. You all have different needs. I'm sure some communities here, you might be a retirement community and everybody's, 65 over. Some communities might be brand new and everybody's only in their 20s. You have different needs. Have the conversation internally. If you want to, have conversation with someone outside to help guide that, there's lots of resources. Send me an email if you want. I'll chat with you or whatever. Okay, load management, load balancing. When you're looking at systems, ask about those things. Even if you don't know what it means, ask about it and listen to the responses. So ask about load managed. Is your system load managed? Are you going to make sure you don't overload my gear in my garage? So forth and so on. And then optimize charging rates. I will just let you know there are solutions out there that will help make sure you use the lower cost electrons if you are in a place where there are time of use rates. If you're not familiar with time of use rates, that's where the electric company charges you one rate when everybody's using power and a lower rate when nobody's using power. And usually there's an intermediate tier as well. Okay, next slide. I got ahead of myself. I talked about fix it yourself, or you're going to have someone do it for you. By the way, if you didn't think about this, one of the advantages of having somebody do all that for you is if you decide to buy some equipment and put it in and then you have to maintain it, the offset there is that's a variable random cost that you don't know when something's going to break or get vandalized that you have to deal with versus having somebody deal with it for you and have a monthly fee. I'm assuming everyone here kind of gets that trade-off between those two things. And then the next piece is when you're looking for EV charging, I would encourage you to look for a service provider that, if somebody has problems with the EV charging system, they have staff, they have people that do support for that. So just things to think about, which is the kind of point of this conversation, is trying to impart what we deal with all the time to give you the right questions to ask when you're out there looking for this stuff. Okay, next slide, or next piece of this slide. And then this is that, it's an amenity, landscaping, pool. Think of it that way. It's an important way to think about it. And then, doesn't so much apply to HOAs. This is these two bullets are kind of a carryover from when we talked to apartment complex owners. But, at an apartment complex, and it can apply to an HOA, you can look at it as a premium amenity. Maybe you charge for it. Maybe certain spots get electrified and people got to pay an extra monthly fee to use them. And then there is, if the system you are installing does come with some kind of monthly charges, a lot of them also have the ability to say, hey, if you want us to, we can tack on a few more pennies on the electricity and that can offset some of your ongoing costs to keep the system up and running. So just things to think about. So you want to know if those systems have things like, the ability to take some revenue out of the electricity. Next slide. All right. Hey, Connor, just give me a heads up on how we're doing on time, on how much we have left. And just for the speaking part, let's leave the Q&A out of it. Just put it in the
Yeah.
chat if you would, to me.
We have about 2 slides left, and we have about 6 minutes left.
Perfect. That's what I thought. Yeah. By the way, for everybody on the call, my case study slides were my buffer zone. So these were, if we ran out of time, we were going to skip them. But I thought you would enjoy seeing some projects that have been done and what they are. So this one is we did a project in Palo Alto, California on Stanford University property. These two buildings are condos that are owned by professors at the university. They were built in 2014. They have 112 condos. They actually had shared charging units in there, and they, for various reasons, some never worked, some did work, some were broken. They didn't have a great experience, and so they looked to say, hey, we need to do something different. And this building, they were always told, by the way, when they bought into this building, they were told this building is set up for EV charging, which the back-end infrastructure was there, but it wasn't built out into the garage very well. So we had a long conversation with them, and they eventually decided to go with the company I'm at. And we went in and replaced what they had, and we added 128 parking spaces with EV charging. Okay, so why more parking spaces in condos? Because the unit that was put in there, it can actually serve 2 spots. And so when we wanted to do the 112 so that everybody in the complex had at least 1 parking spot that they could charge a car at, we just got some extras by the way that the parking spots were laid out. In other words, unit 1 had this spot and 2 had this spot, and 2 had 2 spots, just the way it lays out sometimes in the garage. And then at that property, we activated 40 spots on day 1. All 128 are capable. And by the way, thank you, CPAU. They're on the call today too. So if you happen to be sitting in Palo Alto, California, this is the breakout room you're going to drop into. They actually covered 70% of the cost of that install. So that brought that down. And if you want to do the math on the back end, knock yourself out. But that brought that down to out of pocket. The association said, hey, it's $530 per unit, more or less, to do what we're doing. That's a pretty small special assessment. I can guarantee you they got more back in resale value for those units than that money that you put in. Okay, next slide. All right, so this one is this is actually an apartment complex instead of a HOA, but fine. It just gives you a different model. So this building had 80 units, 90 parking spots. We went in and we made 20 spots capable of charging EVs. So they don't have assigned, well, they do have assigned parking, but it's reassignable. So they just would assign the EV chargers into those spots. This was a very cost-effective project. Things you're looking at in your garage, do you have easy places to mount equipment? Can the pipes be run on the walls, cost effectively? So stuff like that is going to tell you that you've got a more cost-effective install to do versus maybe a more expensive. Next slide. And this was another complex. I could imagine many of you may be in a complex of this size, and this is a good example. So this is a complex in Mountain View. It has 24 units, so not the largest complex on the planet. And we went in and covered one parking space for every unit. And those were the assigned spots. The property itself does have, 8 more parking spots that are kind of floaters that people can use. And this was also relatively cost effective. Now, somebody asked about new power. So this property, you can see in that top right corner, that's all their electrical gear. You may see by looking at that photo, it looks rather dated. And so we kind of looked at it. It's got a fused disconnect instead of a breaker. And we looked at all that and said, this particular property, and they already had overhead power coming in, and they didn't have a ton of spots, so we didn't need a lot to electrify the whole place. So we looked at it and we said, it's going to be cost effective for us just to get new power from the utility. So in that bottom left photo, you can see those two things in the center, those mastheads where the power's coming in for all of the residential units. And then we put a new one in on the left. That's where the power's coming in for the EV charging. So we just added a whole new electrical system that just covers the EV charging. It was a great project that was supported by PG&E and Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and I think also CalSTART. So good project there. All right, next slide. All right. Hey, John. So now we're going into some Q&A. So Connor, I'm going to, by the way, if you scan that QR code, it's going to open up a contact on your phone you can save. It's just going to give you my email address. So whichever technology you like better. Connor, if you want to kick off the Q&A, you Q and I'll A.
I'll do the kickoff, and so I appreciate that. I want to turn everyone's attention to the Q&A feature. Mike, if you go to the very top of your Q&A feature, you will see that there is most recent and most upvotes. You want to click on most upvotes. If anyone has a question, it's time to vote for your favorite questions. And we have one here by Gary that has 10 upvotes. So that's a pretty good one. So we'll go ahead and start off with Gary. I'm going to give a couple seconds here for everyone to find that feature and to make their votes. And we'll start off with Gary right here. Can you see that, Mike? Okay, up in the upper right corner.
Yep, I got my most upvotes. Thanks.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
For individual chargers, do owners need to purchase insurance and the hold harmless the HOA? To hold harmless the HOA.
Okay. I'm going to answer this in probably 2 or 3 ways. One, I'm first going to start with the David answer. Talk to your lawyers, check with them. I'm not legal counsel. 2, if a resident were to purchase their own charger and have it installed by their electrician, aka this is not an HOA sponsored thing, I would think there may be some need there to look into this issue. And then I would say on the other end, if it's a complex wide installation and the EV charging system being sponsored and put in by the HOA, then there's nothing to, it's a community deal, right? And it should fall under all of your normal and existing insurances. Hopefully that's an adequate answer for that guy.
Okay, well, that sounds good. I think it's a similar question. I think this is probably a typical question of most HOAs is, who's responsible if there is a fire, and it's part of the EV charging system. And I suppose it probably depends on who's at fault, right? So
yeah, let's dig into this question a little bit. So who's responsible, but also let's talk about just briefly, statistically, everybody has this thing about being worried about EVs bursting into flames. Everybody should go look on your own, Google it. The percentage chance of an EV having a fire is significantly lower than the percentage chance of your internal combustion engine car having a fire. So know that first, okay? The other thing to know is when you're charging an EV or charging a lithium ion battery, usually what causes a lithium ion battery to have any issues is if there's actually been physical damage to the cell. And that's why I did that public service announcement earlier about e-mobility devices, because they do have these lithium ion cells. And let's be honest, the 8 to 12-year-old kid riding a scooter or a bike doesn't ever use the kickstand. They just drop the thing and walk away. And so I have much more concern about those two-wheeled devices than I would these four-wheeled devices. And then to get into responsibility, it would be no different than if your gas car caught on fire than your EV. So it's the same deal, right? It's not the charging system's fault. It's going to be some fault with the EV most likely. If you do that assigned charging and you're doing it at a lower amperage, the odds of the charging system doing anything to that car having an issue also drops. A lot of those things have to do with trying to jam a whole lot of electrons into, the battery storage very quickly. So hopefully that helps with that one.
Yeah, and Jane, I think you would want to talk to your insurance carrier and also your attorney to make sure that you are covered at the HOA level. Your HOA is covered.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm not aware if there's special riders for having EVs in the garage these days. With the way insurance is in California, it wouldn't surprise me if there's a surcharge.
Well, fire's a big deal here in California these days, so people are very nervous about it. And that's a good question.
Yep.
What is the approximate cost of installing each of the three types of charging stations, not including conduit and wire from the existing electrical system to the charging station? I think one of your people, Rob, responded to that, and I think you all can look in there and see.
Yeah. So, the answer there, Rob. So thanks, Rob. Rob's answering. So the equipment. So basically, if you're taking out the conduit and the wire, you're taking actually out the installation, and you're only asking about what does the equipment cost. And those would be the answers. At level one, if you're doing a managed smart outlet that manages charging and manages billing and so forth and so on, you're about $600 a unit parking spot. And then level two, yep, 15 to 2,500. And then at DCFC, that equipment, 10 to 50 grand. Those are really reasonable answers. I'm going to just augment that, because this is a question I know you will have. What's the installed cost, with the pipe and the wire and the breakers and the panel? So on the level one stuff, we see that being anywhere from, on the low end, it might be $2,000 a spot. And it can go up to, 3,500, give or take. Special circumstances, it can go beyond that. On the level two, I'm going to point that, I heard from one of the partners we have on here, in their program, their average cost for level two being fully installed was about 8,500. I'm thinking of you, Melanie at PCE. And then DCFC, it can be really high just because you got a lot of power to bring in, concrete pads to pour, underground power, so forth and so on. So probably multiply your equipment cost by, 3 to 10.
Okay, and so that's the initial outlay.
Yep.
And then there's an ongoing cost as well. And what are those run? The monthly.
Okay, ongoing costs, good question. Ongoing costs, realistically, you're at probably $200 annually for ongoing costs on some managed level one per parking spot. I have seen them dip down lower, but then I've read the fine print and you go, oh, well, yeah, they're saying lower, but it doesn't work if you don't add that, and it kind of comes right back up. Maybe you'll see it for less, but read the fine print. I'd say that number is a pretty good one. On your level two stuff, you probably go up 50%, $300 a year. And I have no idea what the annual recurring is on a DCFC. Sorry, not my space.
Okay, and so when you do that, you can generate some revenue from the actual charging station that the HOA can use to cover those ongoing costs, right?
Sometimes you can, yes. So there's a choice there, right? There's you could make some charging on the property publicly available if your property lends itself to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could absolutely even make revenue off of, the random people coming by to charge. I look at most multifamily as a closed community, and you don't want strangers coming to the property. So now you'd be extracting revenue from, whoever lives there. So yes, you could say, hey, we're gonna, take this up fee it a little bit. Most multifamily, in my personal experience, what we do day to day, a lot of that, the fees for the maintenance, we have a thing where the HOA may pay some in the beginning, but then when enough people use it, there's no more HOA burden. It just passed directly to the end users.
So there are options for that, and I wasn't suggesting public. I was thinking those that are using the system, because we have a lot of people that are elderly and they're not going to convert. They're going to their Cadillac, right? And so if you have to maintain the system, was what the point you made, I think clearly, is that you need to maintain these systems. What is
Yes.
the cost going to be ongoing, and can you charge those people uniquely that are using
You can.
and the software allows you to do that, correct?
Yeah. And I would remind people though, so you're 100% correct, but I will remind people these things installed on your property are increasing the value of your real estate. So, even if you got the old dusty Cadillac and you're never going to swap it out and whatever, realize you are getting some benefit out of a system on your property. You're making the whole complex, up level a little bit and more attractive to future buyers.
Okay, and so that brings up another really, really good point.
Mhm.
So we're touching some very important points for board members. And so here's the situation. You've mentioned that putting a system like this in play is an amenity to the association. That means there's going to be a responsibility of the association to maintain those systems. And so make sure you check with your attorneys because when you add an amenity like a swimming pool or a pool room, a new common area feature, that makes a change in the way the HOA manages the risk and responsibilities for that. So, and I believe it's going to take a special, for some systems, it will take a special vote of the community to allow it to happen. So just put that in the back of your mind. You can't just say, hey, I'm going to go forward with this as a board. And at the dollar amounts we're talking about here, there's going to be the potential for this to be considered under HOA, David Sterling, a line item on your reserves and an investment in the community. So that's just one thing to remember. Okay, Nancy Kemper with 11 votes here. We appreciate that. In my community, some of the HOA boards require homeowners to purchase a separate fire insurance policy when installing EV chargers. This is for homeowners owned chargers. Do you recommend this? Why or why not?
Okay, so I'm not going to answer the insurance part of the question. I'm going to answer this. Do I recommend letting homeowners install their own EV charging? Because I think we've already covered the insurance part. My honest answer, no, I don't recommend it. And I'll tell you why. So there's a case where I think it's kind of okay. It's kind of okay if they go in and they tap into their own meter, right? But the reason I generically say no, I don't recommend it is you're going to allow the first X number of people, whether that's 5 or 10 or 20, I don't know what it is, but they're going to get in there and they're going to get their EV charging installed. And it's going to be, random pieces of equipment from different folks. It's not going to work together to load manage. There's a bunch of stuff it's not going to do. And those first 5, 10 or whatever people, it'll work for them. They'll get something installed. The calculations will work. The permit will get issued, but there will be a point when no one else can add EV charging because you have done a onesie, twosie, one-off solution that's been kind of hodgepodged. And there will not be enough power left in your system, so forth and so on. And now the rest of the community is going to be burdened with, geez, now we have to bring in new power from the utility, or we have to force those people that installed stuff to rip it out so we can put in a system that everybody can use. So I'm actually pretty adamant on that one. No, I don't recommend it. And that's why. You can do it. You can do whatever you want. Your properties, but I don't recommend it.
Just be careful about that. Now, Vicky asked an interesting question. It was related to what I mentioned earlier. We have assigned carport parking, and we had one person install EV charging for his car at his expense.
Mhm.
Can we keep it as a homeowner expense? And I don't know that that's a question for you, Mike, but that is one of the questions. Who owns what? And one thing, Vicky, that you do, from an HOA perspective, you will, if you have assigned parking, the assumption is that you can move those assigned parking spaces potentially. And it depends on your governing documents. And so if you have built in an EV charging station for assigned parking, and for whatever reason you need to move that person out of that location, then you might have some issues that you have to deal with that you probably don't
Yeah.
want to.
By the way, I'm gonna stay in the general session just for more Q&A for anybody who doesn't have a room to go to. So if we wanted to talk about that more later, just stick around, Vicky. But by the way, if you have a breakout room that's geographically appropriate for you, I highly recommend you go to that. Okay, let's go to the next one.
That's really great. So let's go to the next question. And again, from Jane Groosby. Good questions from Jane today. We have the deeded spots and people don't want to jockey their cars. How do we handle this?
Yeah, it's fine. As a company, and I see Rob's put some stuff in there too that I haven't read yet, but we do this all the time. This is what we do. So when I talked about finding your e-sheets, finding your architectural drawings, I did not mention, and I should have, well, before you engage with somebody, I did talk about knowing whether you wanted assigned or unassigned one spot per unit or all the spots covered. But you need someone to come in and say, hey, here's where all of the deeded assigned spots are. And, we want to make sure at least, if someone has two spots versus one, we want one spot for each unit. Your provider, and if, can figure out how am I going to install this so that we have equitable access, right? And that's what we see all the time with HOAs is if the community is choosing to do something, we need to have equitable access to the system that we put in. So that's what we look for. You don't move the cars around. You just leave them where they are and you bring the power to them. If that's cost prohibitive is what you're trying to ask, then you buy and sell spots. You have a legal transaction, the spots are deeded, someone bought one, someone sold one, you move people like that. And everybody has to agree. That's kind of the short answer there. David, you deal more with HOAs. Do you have any different view on that than I do?
No, I don't. I don't. It's well, the one thing I'd like to say is that when you're dealing with an HOA, nothing is easy. Nothing is simple. So it's just important for the parties to talk about it and make sure that you get the appropriate experts in there. And like I mentioned, the amenity, that's one thing. And who's using what, the community has to buy into it and make sure that it's incorporated into the governing documents one way or another, either through rule or through amendments to the CC&Rs or whatever the needs are to be. But get it down pat, and policies are going to be important with respect to EV as well. So it's good, and I don't want to appear to be throwing water on this, but dealing with HOAs has its own set of peculiarities that we need to navigate.
Yep.
Okay.
Ooh, great question. Okay, so how close are we to the breakout rooms? About 5
We have
minutes.
about 5 minutes, right?
Yeah. So this question, whoever put it up there, you're anonymous. You can stay that way. But this is the lead-in question. This is perfect. So are there grants that an HOA can get to help them fund EV installations? Yes. So there's rebates, there's grants, there's subsidies. Many of them are geographically based. Pretty soon we're going to talk about the breakout rooms and where you should go. So I'm going to reserve the rest of it. But yes, there's absolutely things you can do. And we have over a dozen organizations on this call in these breakout rooms that's why they're here, is to help you with this. All right, next.
There,
if we have
there
more time.
continues to be, and I'm going to skip over the next ones, but
Okay.
there's concerns about fire. I think a lot of the fire issues really were relating to solar panels and some of the issues they had with the batteries they had in the past. Not so much EV. It doesn't seem like EV is much of a hazard. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, it's what we've already. I also saw Mickey put a, I think it was Mickey put an answer in there that thanks, Mickey, that the occurrence of a EV catching fire is actually much lower than the occurrence of a gas powered car catching fire. So
Correct.
all of the concerns about an EV catching on fire, you actually should be happy when more EVs show up because the odds of you having a car fire are decreasing as more and more EVs show up at your property.
Yeah. So I'm going to pass. If we have any other ones we get to, I'm going to just pass over those. But is there a problem of vandalism and how can we control? Now, vandalism can be many things, and it can be, petty theft where you have a kid going in and, just putting their car up or spray painting or that type of thing. So what's your thought on that?
Yeah, okay, so
I'll
I'm
give
going to
you
address
answers.
so
So
vandalism. The most common thing you see in EV charging is people come by and they cut the cords off when you have corded EV chargers. They do it for one of two reasons. One, they think the area is gentrifying and it just ticks them off, or two, they think they can recycle it and make money on it, and there's not enough copper in there to care. Um, so vandalism. So if you're in a gated area, probably not an issue. Hopefully your other homeowners aren't vandalizing your stuff in the property. If it's
Mhm.
not gated, you can choose to have solutions that don't have cords because that's the most common thing that is vandalized. There's many solutions. There's solutions out there that there is no cord on it. You bring your cord with you and you plug it in, and then when you're done charging, you take it with you again. So you can control it by physical access. You can control it by the equipment that you put in. Maybe you can control it with automatic lighting in the area to decrease the odds of somebody wanting to do harm in that spot on your property.
Yeah. And cameras too can help.
Yes.
We've seen an increase in vandalism of certain types of charging stations. So it just uh, it certainly could happen, but it's not a prevalent problem.
Yep.
Okay. Anonymous, if they come to a lot of our programs,
Yes, they do.
yeah, just left on, and good questions too. If the chargers for EVs are in the common area, is it first come, first served? How do the homeowners pay for the change for the charge?
Hard.
What happens if something happens, catches fire, stops charging, whatever, there's a maintenance issue. If the charger is in the homeowner's garage or carport, they still need to set up an individual electrical metering. Is that
Okay. So, as David, as you and I think we both agreed, we've already answered the fire part of it, so we're gonna drop that.
yeah.
So if it's in the common area, okay. So if you put charging in a common area, depending on the system you install, yes, it can be first come, first served. So if there's a spot available, you pull into it and you use it. Some systems do allow you to kind of reserve the spot. So that means that, you get into a queue and, you show up at your appointed time and, it should be vacated by then and you can pull in. So that answers that part of the question. Homeowners garage carport. So if that garage is attached to your unit and the power that flows to it is already behind your meter, you don't have to set up anything. That was my very first comment, or my early comments when we started this conversation. I said those people can just drop now. If it's in a carport or something like that, that's kind of like the other question, can someone, and so again, you get back to, do they have access to power from behind their meter to install into the spot that they're assigned? That's what you look at. Typically, you don't want someone to install a charger in their assigned spot in a carport from your house power, because now you've got an issue of figuring out how to do that. And that's the onesie twosie issue. And yes, it happens all the time. I walked a property the other day. It's like you follow the conduit. Oh, that's going to the house meter. The whole community is paying for that electricity. So that's where you put in a system that allows that charging to be paid for properly.
Okay, so I think we're finished with our time here. I appreciate
Yep.
you're taking these questions, Mike. But also, I want to say thank you to all of you for attending today's session and supporting what amounts to our ongoing ECHO webinars. We do about 106 of these a year. For those of you who are not ECHO members, please consider becoming an ECHO member and supporting HOA boards throughout the country. To join ECHO, just simply go to our website, and there's a tab you can go to, www.echo-ca.org, and you can find the spot to go. If not, you can call Connor or me, and we'll be happy to sign you up. For ECHO members, I want to say thanks again for supporting us, and please invite your friends, boards, and especially management firms and vendors to participate in ECHO. Where it's a simple invitation often that gets them motivated to stay and encourage them to join ECHO. And we are principally funded by our community membership contributions to ECHO. We are what's known as a member philanthropy nonprofit. If you would like to become more involved with ECHO, we have a few opportunities for you. Please refer to the slide Connor has placed up on your screen now. If you see anything that looks particularly interesting, we'd love to talk with you. I think I would like to speak with some of the agencies and groups that were in the breakout rooms. We do have some opportunities for writing and for outreach in-person meetings as well, and I'd love to do that with you. And now I have a few other announcements I'd like to make. ECHO, the ECHO HOA University has an educational program focused on HOA board preparedness. The core curriculum of 10 courses is designed for high quality training and is available for HOA board members, interested homeowners, and professionals, basically everyone. Your participation in this program will earn you a certificate of HOA board member preparedness. Those of you struggling with board apathy or community apathy, this is a great way for people to learn and be educated about how to manage an HOA, and sometimes that gets them involved. So the courses are often offered live online, and most of the courses are recorded and available on demand. So if you're an ECHO member, you can get them on demand. If you or someone you know wants to enroll in the certification program, please send an email to Connor, and he'll be happy to set you up. His email address is on the screen. We are now heading into our quarter number 2 of the resource panels. These are small meetings where we bring communities together to talk. I noticed Connor and I are in Orange County, so I saw the Orange County panel. That would be really nice to have a group that can talk about electric vehicles, charging stations in our local little chapter, if you will. We also have a new panel in Los Angeles, and then we have meetings in San Diego for Southern California, and we have another 11 meeting spots up in Northern California. The next meeting that we have is the Sacramento Resource Panel, which is in Roseville, actually. It is going to be on April 1st, and it will be discussing fire and fire prevention in communities, and we'll have a special presentation by Firewise Emergency Preparedness Administrator who will be there, Sonia. The ECHO Club at Rossmore, which is an active 55 community, but it's in the East Bay in Walnut Creek. We are happy to have anyone join that particular meeting on April 2nd. When and why it's important for the board to have a project manager as a topic there, and we're looking forward to that presentation and conversation. San Francisco also has a resource panel, and it is going to be a discussion about facade inspections and other inspections in the city, and with unique emphasis on the unique laws and ordinances in the city. So we have a specialist in that area. He will be discussing this particular area. It's a little more challenging in San Francisco. There are a lot of little things that you have to know about. I didn't even know there was a facade inspection requirement, and there is. In the East Bay, we have a resource panel in San Ramon. It will be Thursday, April 3rd. And we are going to be doing a review of the legislative session, the current session. And so the legislative update will be done by an attorney named Nathan McGuire. He's also on the ECHO board, and he will be doing that. So if you're interested in participating and learning a little more about what new legislation is going to be coming down the pike, this is a good one to talk about before the legislation actually goes to the governor's desk. I know that there's quite a bit going on with ADUs, junior accessory dwelling units, and other things that may make it a little more complicated to be a board member. We also have 3 larger in-person meetings planned this year. We have one in Northern California coming up in San Jose on June 7th. And that's a fairly large one. We'll have about 125 to 150 people attending with several tabletops. We hope to have, maybe we can have someone from the Santa Clara or San Jose participate in that one so that we can have people ask questions about EV in person. It'd be nice to have someone there. In Southern California, we have an educational seminar at the Laguna Hills Community Center. And that we'll have several folks there. The theme of that is who's responsible, and the legislative update in Northern California. Again, we'll be going over the laws that do pass, and we'll look at implementation of those laws. Plus, we'll be doing several other things like election balloting, and I was just working on the program earlier, but it's November, and that one's coming down the pike. If you're interested in those, we'd love to have you. If you want to learn more about ongoing insurance issues for HOAs, which are mammoth at this point, we will be having our annual Ask the Experts About Insurance seminar on June 4th. I highly recommend this if you have questions about insurance. It's structured much the way this event was structured, and you will be able to hear from the generically and as an educational session in a plenary, and then we break into the breakout rooms, several sessions, and you will be able to ask specifically your questions about insurance. You can ask your questions about EV charging station, which evidently was a big issue here today as well. Once again, I want to thank you, Mike, for this wonderful presentation. You did a great job, and a special thank you for coordinating and working with Connor. The two of you seem to work really well. I know it took a lot of extra work on your part, so I appreciate that. And I want to thank all of our breakout room contributors as well. You did a wonderful job. I went into several of the rooms, and it seemed like people were very engaged and interested in what you had to say. And of course, I want to say thanks to all of our attendees today for making this a successful event. ECHO appreciates your investment in education to foster a better quality of life in HOA communities, which is our mission.